sometimes I think to myself, if only somebody would write the right passage or say the right thing at the right time, then we humans will be all good. But I'm not so sure about that anymore, because I think what needs to be written has been written, and what needs to be said has been said. The problem isn't necessarily in what we must say or write or think, but it's in implementing these things. It's in actually operationalizing them. Because just look here, read this book. Okay, there's a paragraph in the last chapter, I think it is, The Fourth Frontier. There's a paragraph in this chapter that explains perfectly what's going on. Yeah, that's the last chapter, before the epilogue. It explains perfectly why we're liquidating our planet. It's so perfect. And it also explains why it is when we no longer experience growth, as a felt experience, as organisms, and more specifically as lineages or populations, as proxy for lineage. Why, when we don't experience growth, we can, through our cognition, through certain cognitive structures, justify atrocities. I'll just read this paragraph. Sometimes we violate our stated values by inventing justifications to steal from a population that has resources but not the means to defend them. Other times we degrade the world and inflict decline, the opposite of growth, on our descendants in order to fuel current expansion. The former scenario accounts for many of the greatest atrocities in history. The latter explains the modern experience of watching the goodness of our planet liquidated before our eyes. Growth über alles is a disastrous creed. So that's just one paragraph. Buried in that paragraph is the explanation for why we humans are doing what we're doing. And so Bret Weinstein is one of the authors of this book. And I remember recently rewatching his debate with Richard Dawkins. And on stage, Dawkins is very, very, very hesitant to explore what humans are, what humanity is, with an evolutionary lens. And that's ironic, because this is the guy who told us that the gene is at the base of evolution, and that all evolution cares about is putting into the future a certain genetic makeup. That's it. And, humans are genetic organisms. We're biological beings. But Dawkins refuses to acknowledge, while on stage, Bret's suggesting that we view human history through the evolutionary lens. This is what clicks everything in place, at least to my mind. It's what makes the atrocities in history make sense.
This is the place that you begin to understand what history really is, and it actually lends a great deal of power to your point about the need to rebel against selfish replicators. I mean, let's look
very
at
much so, yes.
the Second World War.
Yes.
Right? Even the terminology. You had the fatherland effectively raping Mother Russia. I mean, that's even the terminology, right? So what this was a lineage-level phenomenon in which a population went after two other populations, one that was internal to its borders or its near neighbors, and one population that was distant but had a great many resources. But the point is, understood from the perspective of German genes, vile as these behaviors were, they were completely comprehensible from the level of fitness. It was abhorrent and unacceptable, but understandable that Germany should have viewed its Jewish population as a source of resources. If you viewed Jews as non-people, then whatever resources they had could be appropriated for German genes. And likewise, the future of Germany lies in Russia. All of the resources of Russia. And how many million? Is it 20 million Russians it took to turn the German war machine around? So what you have are these population against population conflicts. If you view it as group selection, it makes no sense. But if you view them as lineages, it makes a great deal of sense. And the belief structures that caused people to step onto battlefields and fight were clearly comprehensible as adaptations of the lineages in question.
I think nationalism might be an even greater evil than religion. And I'm not sure that it's actually very helpful to talk about it in Darwinian terms. I think it's, perhaps this might be a case where we do need to defer a little bit to historians and non-biologists and think about it in other ways.
And we watch movies, say. I've been watching a few, old school movies, 1960s, old movies, about the time of, Alexander the Great and the time of the Spanish Inquisition and these sorts of things. And it's just taken for granted that there's going to be bloodshed. And that's a great part of the movie, actually. Achilles is another example where there's just bloodshed. Gladiator, another example of a movie where we just see bloodshed. And this is all taken for granted, but when you take the evolutionary lens and you look at it through the evolutionary lens, you can see, oh, these people are fighting because they view themselves as different from one another. It's us versus them sort of a thing. In the Spanish Inquisition, the line was drawn by religion. Christianity versus Muslims. The Moors versus the Spaniards, or the Christian Spanish. Okay? And it makes sense. Not to say that this justifies the bloodshed, but it's just to say it makes sense. And then you go one level further and you say, okay, look at what we humans are doing to the earth. We're currently plundering the earth of its resources. We're in what's called ecological overshoot, which means we are exploiting and harvesting resources at a rate beyond which they can be replenished in the earth by the earth systems. And we're producing waste at a rate that far exceeds the earth's capacity to assimilate that waste. So you think to yourself, oh wait, what we're actually doing is the ecological overshoot thing, but we're stealing from future generations, people who have yet to be born. My kids, your kids, we're stealing from. This should infuriate us. This is really, really tragic because we can't see this. And I wonder if that's actually in the Greek tragedy. I forget now, but I remember. No, I forget, but I vaguely remember studying what the Greek tragedy is, and I'm pretty sure the Greek tragedy is where the protagonist ends up in a terrible situation by his own doing, without his knowledge that he did this to himself. Where are we humans right now in history? This is exactly where we are. We are bringing our own... It's as if we are like the fuel for a self-fulfilling prophecy that says something like, we humans do not deserve to live here, or something like that. I don't know. No, cut that. That's BS. No, this is something else. No, it's more simple than that. Okay, don't get me wrong. I love the artistic perspective, but sometimes I just want to cut straight to the core and just know what's happening here. And this is it. We are behaving as humans have behaved for the whole of our history, only this time around it's a bit more abstract. It's one more level above what we were doing in the past, because of technology, because we have now the technological capacity to steal from future generations. In other words, we have the fracking machinery to go deep down into the earth, to take out fossil fuels at a rate at which they cannot be replenished in the earth, and which itself creates waste at a rate that exceeds the earth's capacity to assimilate said waste. We are now, through technology, stealing from the future. That's not on. But I don't know how to frame that other than the evolutionary lens in such a way that would mobilize action for us to do something about this. I don't know. But anyway, is it just a case of we need this message to be heard by the most amount of people possible? I like to tell myself the comforting story that once a critical upper threshold of people have been exposed to this message, have understood this story in evolutionary terms, well then we can do something about it. But I don't know if I'm just lying to myself when I say that. Because this book has been written, and these guys have a wonderful podcast called the Dark Horse Podcast, where they say what they need to say. Do their words have an effect on the earth? I don't know, but their words are sharp, to the point.